Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to this, the second of our Dante public lectures this year. And I'm really delighted to have Anna Pegoretti with us finally, because she's someone who's been on my hit list for a long, long time. So after Francesca Meyer last week talking about justice in Dante, we're moving on to something completely different. And what I like about the Dante lecture series every year is the fact that the topics that people talk about are so diverse. And notwithstanding the fact that Anna is a true Dantista, she's actually going to be talking about something very, very modern and I think of real interest to people who work on memory studies and issues in and around commemoration. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And she's also the first person in the 14-year history of the Dante lecture series to come up with a title that is approximating a Bob Dylan album. So this hats off to you for that. So just to introduce you for those who don't know, Anna graduated from Bologna. From there, she went to Pisa for her doctoral studies. But she has spent a lot of time specifically in the UK, where she was at the Warburg Institute. She was at Leeds Centre for Dante Studies. And it was while she was in Leeds that she actually came here many, many years ago to help with Matthew and Claire run one of our very successful Dante study days for undergraduates in the 3 Irish universities that study Dante. And that was a wonderful experience to have and to meet Anna that first time. She went then to Warwick and also to Reading. So she spent quite a lot of time in the UK before returning to Italy and is now an associate professor at the University of Roma in Rome. And she is one of our leading Dantisti. She is an expert in many fields. She is part of a huge project looking at the Santa Croce Library, but she's also worked on kind of different aspects of Dante. And among the numerous publications that she has, there's also this wonderful book, Dante a Trento, of which we're going to hear a little bit tonight, Usi e abusi di una retorica nazionale 1890-1921, looking at the Dante monument in Trento and how it has been manipulated and usurped and used for different political and social reasons. So, will you please join me in welcoming Anna Pegoretti. Share screen.
So thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and for listening to me. And of course, I want to express my gratitude to the Center for Dante Studies in Ireland, to the Department of Italian here at Cork, and to Dara for inviting me and having me here. As Dara was saying, I actually came here many years ago when the center was at the very beginnings. Mm-hmm. And it's really great to see to what extent it has grown over the years and the achievements of the center are really remarkable. So I'm really proud to be here and to be part of this lecture series. So before starting properly, allow me to share some initial reflections. The topic of this lecture holds a personal significance for me. Trento is my hometown, and its Dante monument has been part of my personal landscape since I was a child. Its story was known, actually, and it had already been investigated. So when I started my research, my modest aim was to enhance its international visibility among Dante scholars with just a short article, possibly in English. I actually ended up with writing a monograph, crossing over public history, history of literature and culture, probably because I'm too affluent and too logoroica. But actually this also happened because the Dante in Trento provides a scientifically compelling case study from various perspectives. So it stands out as a pinnacle and perhaps the most historically significant instance of the 19th century use of Dante as a national symbol. Moreover, it encapsulates the dynamics of the borders, the tensions between different nations and nationalisms, what it means to be a nation, the perception of collective identities, and the paramount role of literature in the 19th century process of nation building across Europe, and not least the potential of inter and multinationalism. So, let's start. On Sunday, the 11th of October 1896, a prominent Dante monument was unveiled in the city of Trento, which, along with Trieste and Dalmatia, was an Italian-speaking territory of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So just to refresh some history, the Italian parts of the huge Austrian-Hungarian empires are the ones in light green. So 20 years later, exactly on the same day, so the 11th of October 1921, the Italian king Vittorio Emanuele III and Queen Elena paid their first official visit to Trento to mark both the annexation to Italy of Trento and Trieste in the First World War and the 6th centenary of Dante's death, because of course it was 1921, on the very day of the 25th anniversary of the monument. Notably, the month before, the king had deserted the celebrations at the poet's tomb in Ravenna in polemics with the Republican positions prevailing in the region. In redeemed Trento, the king could finally celebrate the fulfillment of the unification process and the accomplishment of the Italian Risorgimento. He could do so in front of its most symbolic figure, Dante, the father of Italy, the Sommo Italiano. In the 2 decades following its inauguration, and even more during the Great War, the Trento monument was increasingly used for propagandistic purposes, cementing its role as a symbol of the so-called irredentism, conveying opposition to the existing government and the desire for the Italian-speaking citizens of the empire to be annexed to Italy. Yet, if in the early 20 years of the 20th century, the irredentist, so subversive, let's say, meaning of the monument progressively unleashed its fullest potential, during its construction, things were not as straightforward. So, let's refresh once again some history, So in 1866, the Third War of Independence ended with the annexation of Veneto to Italy, leaving Trento and Trieste to Austria. In 1882, the Triple Alliance between Germany, Austria, and Italy had dashed any hope for them to be united with Italy. So in Trento and Trieste, any kind of irredentist perspective could only appear as an unrealistic horizon. So moreover, it is to be said that such a perspective was not really shared by the population at large. At least in Trento and in the Trentino region, Italian sentiments were common in the urban bourgeoisie, but not in the rural population, in the working class, and most crucially amongst clergymen. So hence, this situation, the Trentino local ruling class opted to concentrate efforts on advocating for administrative and political autonomy, especially from the regional government of Tyrol. However, the pursuit of this political agenda ultimately proved unsuccessful. Furthermore, during the 1880s and 1890s, pan-Germanist associations emerged with the objective of safeguarding and advancing German language and culture, especially through schools. On the Italian side, similar national associations were established, and schools became veritable national trenches in a war that aimed at safeguarding children from the perceived threat of a barbarization. Hence, the political deadlock was superseded by a cultural conflict. a situation that was not uncommon throughout the empire. The competition escalated in 1889 with the unveiling in Bolzano of a statue dedicated to the medieval poet Walter von der Vogelweide, a troubadour, but a Minnesänger, symbolizing the defender of German language on its southern border. Walter was then supposed to be a native of South Tyrol, and prominent philologists spent significant efforts to prove this claim, which actually is completely baseless, at least to my knowledge. So this event served as a catalyst for the subsequent initiative of the Dante monument in Trento, and notably the statue of Walter is positioned to face south, whilst the Dante in Trento faces north. So in 1990, a public subscription in Trento was promoted, raising funds mainly in urban centers and amongst the so-called Adriatic Italians, so Italians in Trieste and Dalmatia. The project by the Florentine sculptor Cesare Zocchi was selected through a public international competition, a rather complex and relatively long process that sparkled controversy in the artistic milieu. The promoters of the monument were mainly members of the local Liberal Party. Leading the initiative was Guglielmo Ranzi, a typical figure of the late 19th century liberal and nationalist bourgeoisie, deeply immersed in the literary culture of the Risorgimento, more specifically in what Alberto Mario Banti called the canone risorgimentale. So this literary canon encompassed Foscolo, Manzoni's civil poetry, Vincenzo Gioberti, Giuseppe Giusti, the local hero of Trentino, Giovanni Prati, the world of melodrama, and of course promoted Dante as the patron saint of national culture. Needless to say, this canon at the end of the 19th century culminated in Giosuè Carducci. Ranzi drew inspiration and nourishment from these literary sources as he pursued his endeavors, and echoes of all these authors can be easily detected in his writings and in his, I have to say, rather remarkable speeches. So this literary canon developed during the Risorgimento to build a national cultural paradigm that in post-unification Italy served not to mobilize the population anymore, but rather to build and strengthen the identity of the new state. As George Mosse would put it, it served to nationalize the masses, or according to a famous adage, to make the Italians. And this canon was a prominent part of a widespread national pedagogy that unfolded in schools, in the army, and also through the dedication of streets and landmarks. Monuments played a major role in this process, to the point that even Carducci lamented a monument mania at some point. In Trento, however, and in all unredeemed territories, so Trento, Trieste, and Dalmatia, this national rhetoric was seemingly frozen in a pre-unification stage. It not only served to reinforce the national identity of the people, but more significantly, it regained its original meaning, becoming a catalyst for actual and urgent political action. So according to the promoters, the monument intended to celebrate Dante as the genio tutelare, patron, of the Italian language and civilization in the Trentino region. It was conceived as an explicitly national monument, inasmuch it aimed to assert the Italian character of the region, evident through historical, linguistic, and even anthropological observations. So during the 19th century, numerous statues, of course, and monuments were dedicated to Dante, but they typically feature a single statue with a few symbols and descriptions. In comparison, the Trento monument stands out for its rich and multi-layered iconographic program. Measuring 17 meters in height with a base of 13 meters, it includes a total of 17 bronze statues and several inscriptions. The Dante on the top is 5 meters tall. It doesn't seem like that, but it is. As requested by the call for competition, they thought they needed a very tall Dante because otherwise it could disappear in the, the mountain landscape. So that was a problem of visibility in some sense. It stands on a granite base divided into 3 levels, each one dedicated to a different realm of the other world, so hell, poetry, artists. So on the lowest level, the imposing figure of Minos stands out for size and muscularity. It can be seen as a metonymy for the entirety of hell and for the concept of justice. And to my knowledge, this is a total exception in Dante iconography. From an artistic perspective, this figure draws inspiration from 2 notable European works of that time. The Lucifer by Franz von Stuck and the Penseur by Auguste Rodin, of course. Initially conceived as a representation of Dante himself. And notably, both these works, so the Lucifer and also the Penseur as a part of the Door of Hell, has been displayed in the major exhibition curated by Jean Clair at the Scuderie del Quirinale in the exhibition for 2021 in Rome. So the third level of the monument is adorned with a bronze bas-relief with angels and Beatrice. So this paradise is quite boring compared to the rest of the monument. But Beatrice is overlooking the group below. So within this scene below, so it's this one, so we see the figures of Virgil and Dante with whom? No, but almost there. Sì, Sordello. So, hence, first of all, in the monument as a whole, Dante is represented twice. On the top, as the author and the father of language, and here as a character. So we can use this customary distinction. The group featuring Sordello holds, of course, a paramount significance within the iconographic and political program of the monument. It serves as the focal point that bridges the representation of the other world with the challenging task of visually translating the symbolic and identity value of Italian language, as requested by the promoters. So it's not easy to build a monument to language or to a father of language. It's not easy. But this episode is, to some extent, perfect. The group precisely represents the moment when Sordello recognizes Virgil, of course, expressing his reverence by bowing and embracing him, la ove minor s'appiglia, and praising him as the gloria di Latin per cui mostrò ciò che potea la lingua nostra. These last lines are carved on the foundation stone of the monument. So you see, a Dante Alighieri mostrò ciò che potea la lingua nostra. And they serve as a meaningful caption that encapsulates the ultimate significance of the monument. Yet, in Dante's poem, the situation is indeed far from straightforward, as you know. As Virgil wrote in Latin, Sordello in Languedoc, while Dante himself used the Italian vernacular. So it is not really easy to understand what this communal language should be. And there is a major contribution by Mirko Tavoni giving a reasonable explanation to this. However, in the context of the Trento monument, the meaning of this lingua nostra, which this lingua nostra is absolutely crystal clear. Of course, it is the Italian language, with Dante serving as its champion. So, and please note that of course, in the poem, the subject of the center of the sentence, mostrò ciò che poteva la lingua nostra, is la lingua nostra, that actually unfolded and displayed all its potential through Virgil. Here, the implicit subject is Dante. It's Dante that mostrò ciò che poteva la lingua nostra. So the episode of Sordello as a whole, of course, bears further significance. As you know, in Purgatorio 6, so the canto before 7, Sordello does not know who the pilgrims are yet, but recognizes Virgil as a fellow citizen of Mantua, rising up to hug him. This scene prompts Dante's famous invective to Italy, I Serva Italia, that stigmatizes the internal conflicts and discord plaguing the peninsula. Hence, the statuary group effectively symbolizes also love for the fatherland and fraternity between fellow citizens. This is all implicit, you know, but both cantos can be recalled here. The whole episode can be recalled. On the remaining part of this central frame, so poetry basically, there are 12 more statues arranged in different groups. On the rear side, a prostrate sinner represents the greedy soul, this one, whilst a female soul is ascending to heaven after purification. Only in a private exchange with the sculptor, the artist Cesare Zocchi, Ranzi revealed to read it as a representation of a liberated Trentino. On the east side, 3 figures, there on your right, depict onlookers witnessing the encounter between Sordello and Virgil. The other statues represent the envious with stone eyes, whilst on the west side, 2 prouds are carrying their swords, whilst the 2 indolents represent the moral inertia of fellow countrymen who did not actively support the national cause. And to further exemplify the artistic culture of this artist, who was a teacher at the Accademia di Belle Arti in Florence, so he was very much an academic sculptor. So I can show you what kind of models he could have. So, for instance, the prostrate sinner has a perfect parallel in the drawings by Zuccari devoted to that group of singers. Zuccari drew his remarkable set of illustrations to the Commedia in the 16th century, and the drawings are housed at the Uffizi, so they were in Florence at Zocchi's disposal. And a further example, so the Botticelli, you know, is fading away almost. It's not my fault. This is the best I could do. But of course, this is Botticelli for the Andius. And for me, the parallel, it's quite striking because there are no other examples of just couples of Andius. Okay, so this is the monument, and it's a complete, almost complete, because about the Dante on the top we will talk later. So, at the inauguration, no representatives of the imperial or Tyrolean government attended the ceremony, whilst all sorts of medals and garlands were presented by Italian cities, by the Adriatic Italians, and also by the Società Dantesca Italiana. This is quite a remarkable picture also because it really gives you a sense of the size of the monument, and at its foot you can see all the garlands, more than 100. The orchestra of the Teatro alla Scala came to Trento and played the overtures of the Vespri Siciliani by Verdi and the Guglielmo Tell by Rossini, the last one recounting the history of the liberation of Switzerland from the Austrians. Giosuè Carducci was considered the most prominent intellectual figure in unified Italy, dedicated to the monument a poem later included in Rime e Ritmi, which is Carducci's last collection of poems, and also the most patriotic. The ode, written in the same meter as the Commedia, features as a title the date of Dante's death, and is significantly dated September the 20th, which is the anniversary of the capture of Rome, of course. The two dates establish a precise framework for the poem, intertwining Dante with the destiny of the fatherland and its glorious past. Carducci, in the poem, envisions that at the moment of his passing, a kind of remote god, which is very much a Masonic god, but this is another problem, entrusts Dante with the sacred duty of safeguarding Italy until the perfection of time arrives. Italia, Dio in tua balia consegna, sì che tu vegli spirito su lei, mentre perfezione di tempi vegna. Over 500 years later, Dante appears to have halted in Trento, awaiting like an avant-garde alpine sentinel. Ed or s'è fermo e parca aspetti a Trento, on the terrible bastion of the Alps, dell'Alpi sul tremendo spalto. So, and of course, we could talk quite a lot about the meaning that the Alps had during that, at that time, about the very recent constitution of Alpine Military Corps, and also about the very recent development of alpinism. And one of the really pioneers of alpinism in the Alps was the father of Virginia Woolf, Leslie Stephen, who actually funded the British Alpine Circle. I don't remember the name exactly now. But this is really a crucial moment in the history and the cultural history of the Alps. And also Carducci used to walk and to have holidays in the Alps. And of course, he always searched for meaningful destinations, for instance, Cadore, so he could reach the border and say hello, not hello, to the Austrians on the other side. And then he wrote poems about the Cadore. And so there is quite a very meaningful geography of Italy and also of the Alps. In Rime and Ritmi, you can see it very well, but also in some of the Odi Barbare. So this portrayal of Dante waiting for something on the bastion of the Alps appears to be shaped by an intimate knowledge of the Trento monument, and I'm not able to go on. Ecco, great. So you can see it's this portrayal is quite, I mean, right. So its position in the Alpine surroundings facing north. This is very important. So the meaning of the ode is far from straightforward. I don't know if you had time to read it, but so I don't want to torture you with this, but anyway, it's quite difficult to understand. And also because it plays carefully with allusions and also with a kind of hermetic language, inviting multiple interpretations. What is Dante waiting for? Considering Carducci's own involvement in irredentism, such a Dante safeguarding Italy cannot but wait for the resumption of Italian-speaking territories and the fulfillment of the Risorgimento. Not by chance, the 1923 memorial stone devoted to Carducci on the Mount Piana, on the old border between Italy and the Empire, this is very close to Cortina d'Ampezzo, expresses gratitude to the poet who prophesied victory in his celebration of the Trento monument. Dante aspetta Trento, which is a kind of title, al poeta del vaticinio, a tutti i gloriosi caduti, eccetera. So considering the inauguration and the iconographic program of the monument, one might rightfully wonder how such a celebration could actually take place. And actually, this was my starting point. Because at some point, my daddy asked me, okay, but this has been built during, the Austrians were here. So how could they allow all this? How was it possible? Because in our perception, this is an overtly subversive and irredentist monument. So it was a good question. This was basically my first research question. So it needed to be answered. So in this regard, it is important to point out that both its promoters and the Austrian political authorities were navigating their positions within a multinational juridical and rhetorical culture, one which would eventually be overshadowed by the escalating national tensions in Europe. Indeed, theory was not always easy to put into practice, and positions and claims were in constant negotiation. However, within the imperial juridical and political framework, such an overt national proclamation was perfectly legal. A key norm of the constitution, stemming from the Ausgleich, so the compromise between Austria and Hungary, signed in 1867, stated that all the nations of the state have equal rights and every single nation has the inviolable right to preserve and cultivate its own nationality and language. So for us, at least for Italian native speaker, this sounds really weird because for us, nation nowadays at least is a synonym for state, for Italy as a political entity. But clearly, the idea of nation underlying this rule is independent of belonging to an ethnic state. Nations exist regardless of their institutional framework and have their most distinctive feature in their language. So you can have a kind of political entity that actually encompasses many different nations. The empire recognizes these nations and their right to preserve themselves. Despite the discomfort and restlessness of the Austrian police in Trento, the monument was made possible by this juridical culture and was tolerated by the government at the highest level. So even the prime minister was perfectly aware of what was happening in Trento. And of course, the emperor. In the following 2 decades, the centrifugal tensions within the empire escalated and nationalist movements invigorated all across Europe. Rest is history, we could say. Irredentism gradually embraced more aggressive tones and warmongering rhetoric, associating Dante with its claims, on the assumption that the poet himself had traced the boundaries of the nation within his works. A series of quotations became topical and were staunchly defended by distinguished philologists. As regards Trentino and the northern border, the most contentious lines were l'Alpe che serra la Magna sovra Tiralli from Inferno 20. It's part of the description of Mantua, which actually encompasses of the Garda Lake and all the hydrogeological system of the Garda Basin, which of course includes the Alps. So these lines were reportedly submitted even to President Wilson during the Paris Peace Conference at the end of the First World War. So Dante became part of the negotiations at the end of the war. Between 1907 and 1909, the eminent scholar Guido Mazzoni, a member of Carducci's entourage and a co-founder of both the Società Dantesca Italiana and the Società Dante Alighieri we were mentioning earlier, engaged in a passionate debate with Tyrolean scholars on these lines. Leaning on the entire spectrum of stereotypes linked to the Alps as a providential barrier safeguarding the Bella Italia against perceived barbarians, also Petrarch has some famous lines about the per la tedesca rabbia. Mazzoni argued for the most radical among the available options at the time and contended that Dante had unequivocally delineated the border between Italy and the German-speaking world along the Danube-Adriatic watershed. What it means the border that we have now, so at the Brenner Pass. Okay. And that was not obvious. It was not the only possible option. Also because there were German-speaking population south of the border, so that was a problem. Tellingly enough, his articles were published in the journal funded by Ettore Tolomei, l'Archivio per l'Alto Adige, who years later would infamously inspire the fascist policies of Italianization of South Tyrol. So this was a major, don't think that this is just local. The Archivio per l'Alto Adige published the essays by Ascoli, grazie a Dio, Isaia Ascoli, on Ladino. So that are absolutely fundamental in modern day linguistics. In this context, the Trento monument emerged as a true banner representing Italian claims on the Trentino region, and echoing Carducci stood as a forward sentinel against the enemy assault. It featured as a symbol of Trentino in Italian tourist publications and became a popular destination for the Italian so-called patriotic tours, and also for any kind of sport competition or sports societies or alpine society. So this was, you have to take a picture in front of the monument because especially if you were Italian or advocating for an Italian Trento. Italy's first modern battleship, launched in 1910 and emphatically named after Dante, featured a reproduction of it. And this story of the battleship has been recently recounted by Guy Raffa for Dante Studies. continuo a perdere, sì. The year after, so in 1911, the colossal movie Inferno, that probably some of you know, was released, culminating in a framing of the Trento monument with a caption reading Onorate l'altissimo poeta. In Italy, the image evoked such patriotic enthusiasm among the audience that it was deemed necessary to censor it in order to avoid provoking a diplomatic incident with Austria. During the war, the monument became, of course, a favorite subject for postcards, along with Cesare Battisti, one of the Italian martyrs of the Great War. In 1915, Carducci's poem was included in a small anthology promoted by the Società Dante Alighieri, emphatically entitled Contro l'Eterno Barbaro, a line of Cadore, a poem by the same Carducci, celebrating a 16th century battle against the Habsburgic Empire. And it is said that when Battisti was captured by the Austrians, he had a copy of this anthology in his backpack. Even the Austrians ultimately perceived the monument as the quintessential symbol of the enemy assault. In 1916, the weapons captured during the victorious Sraf expedition were prominently displayed around its base. Likewise, the General Pecoretti, who commanded the Italian troops that entered Trento on November the 3rd, 1918, had himself photographed in front of it. Following the troops, there was also the Japanese poet, writer, and ardent admirer of Dante, Harukichi Shimoi, who would later be nicknamed by Gabriele D'Annunzio Camerata Samurai. And he has a couple of pages about him going to the monument and crying and so on. At the end of the war, the monument became the banner of a victorious epic struggle for liberation from a tyrannical oppression. In short, it came to symbolize the fulfillment of the Risorgimento. Such a view largely prevailed also in, you see, this is just a folio of the National Fascist Party at the very beginning, of course, commemorating Zocchi's death. So, l'attesa è finita, no more waiting. Such a view largely prevailed also in scholarship, to the point that even during the Republican era, the irredentist interpretation of the monument prevailed in both historiography and public perception, overshadowing the complex negotiations of a multinational perspective. The interpretations of the Dante statute positioned at the top is, in this regard, highly revealing. The gesture of his right arm raised towards north has been associated with the notion of marking the border or pointing towards Vienna, or as a warning to foreigners, I barbari. During fascism, it was easily read as a Roman salute, of course. However, not a single description of the monument at the time of its inauguration or even in the aftermath of the war interpreted it as such. By unanimous consent of promoters and onlookers, Dante is just protecting those passing by. And as a matter of fact, is looking downward, not at the border. As Heather Webb pointed out to me, his hand strikingly resembles the protective gesture of Christian Renaissance iconography, and of course, Leonardo is the most famous example, the Virgin of the Rocks. And here is, and this is perfectly plausible in the light of what I showed you before, Botticelli, Zuccari. This is the visual culture of these artists. Dante is protecting the Italians, the Italian Trentini, their language and culture. It's not proclaiming wars or warnings of any sort. So to conclude, let me add a further personal note. I finalized the last draft of my book at the end of February 2022, unable to turn away from the continuous updates on the war in Ukraine. My long-standing aversion to nationalism was at that time further heightened by tons of dull patriotic poems and poetry. I assure you, I read a lot of that stuff. But such aversion to nationalism wavered in front of Ukrainians singing their national anthems amidst bombings and also in front of their longing for Europe. At the same time, in those winter days, I couldn't help but think that if Trento was the most southwest city of the Austrian Empire, on the opposite side, in the northeast, was Lviv, Leopoli. Or does it might sound, parts of Ukraine share my story. A couple of months later, on the 25th of April, the day that in Italy, of course, marks the liberation from Nazi fascism, a friend of mine sent me greetings from Kiev, with Dante contemplating amidst sandbags. In 2009, the artist Lara Favaretto had surrounded the Trento monument with similar sandbags for artistic purposes, of course, sparkling endless debates about the cost of the installation. That was the problem, which is actually quite, was really high. But may the Dante in Kiev be liberated soon and return to trivial everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was really wonderful. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen. And we're going to open it up to questions. If you don't mind, if you want to come back here, I'll just we'll just share. We'll stay near the microphone. But before I kind of open it up to others, I really love the posture of the Dante figure and what you were saying, the gestural thing with the hands. But what about this raised foot?
Yeah.
You know, he's not sitting. He's not standing straight. He's not. It's almost as if he's leaning forward. Why?
So this is a good question. The first answer is that it is walking in a certain way because of artistic reasons. So the first model that Zocchi presented for this competition, but also the second model, to be honest, was that on that model, the Dante on the top was really, you know, like old man looking at cantieri. Come si dice cantiere? Like this. It was really dull.
Yeah.
Umarell, si dice in Bologna. So he needed to actually revamp that figure a bit. So the artistic reason, the first one. Of course, there is also a quite easy meaning behind, symbolic meaning, about, you know, these are times of positivism, of progress, celebration of progress, and of people marching towards the future. It's marching towards north. I know, but this was decided at the very end. The position and the facing of the monument was decided at the very end.
And I mean, we have a colleague here, Donald Hassett, who's done a lot of work on Algeria. And if you remember, Chiara, there was a lot of the statuary there. Where it was positioned, where it was facing, it always has deep political significance for that time. Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, of all the statues that have gone up of Dante, it is it's most imponente. It is the biggest, but there's something about it, and also I think I've never seen it in real life, but I've only seen it in photographs. But what struck me really about it is at the base that less space is given to the Inferno,
Yeah.
which in everything we read and everything we see, the iconography that surrounds Dante, the Inferno is the one part of the text that's given the most amount of space. Here, it's kind of condensed, whereas the Purgatorio seems to be, and quite interestingly, it isn't representation so much of the Purgatorio. Yes, there's the scene with Sordello, but it really is, it is the kind of the kind of patriotic, the political,
Yeah.
the nation coming through from that. Okay, questions?
If I may, I would add something more to this Dante walking, because of course it is quite easy to read it as a kind of, provocative movement. But actually, the underlying idea was that you can go towards the others in order to promote fraternity. There is quite a lot of rhetoric about fraternity. So the Germans built a wonderful monument to Goethe and so on. So we have to do the same, because the great men of history and of literature have to embrace themselves, and we need to be united. And Schiller, of course, the ode, not by chance, the Ode to Joy is the European anthem. So there was also this component that is quite easily reversed.
Yes. And presumably the fascists made great use out of that monument, as we see at the beginning of it, as you were saying. And during the Second World War, was it?
Not really,
No.
No, there are many, that is still nowadays, it is a public, it's a park.
Yeah.
So there are wonderful photographs, you can find them also online quite easily, of the Orti di Guerra. So it became a cultivated area during that time. But no, it was not so much celebrated, also because the reasons of the war were completely different. So, and it was so complicated for that region, all the period with fascists before, and then it became, the Trentino Alto Adige became part of the Third Reich after the 8th of September.
Yeah.
It was not just occupied territories, it was annexed.
Right.
So it's quite Dante was just put aside.
Yeah. And tell me this, I mean, while we're just on the topic, because I mentioned at the beginning before your talk about this forthcoming issue of Biblioteca Dantesca, which is looking at the kind of commemorative function of Dante and how Dante has been utilized in the various for the various centenaries, either through statuary or through celebration or through book publications or whatever. But the most recent big Dante celebration, obviously in 2021, did they do anything nice for him there?
Not really, in part because of the COVID.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
They organized an online exhibition, which is still available, and it's nice because there are many photos also from recent times. And they also promoted, so the city of Trento and the museum, which was the Museo del Risorgimento and now has a completely different name, but it's a public history museum, is so rich that they have a TV, basically, a TV channel.
All right.
Yes, and they make documentaries and all these sort of things. And they actually promoted, I think, a program with 4 puntate, my English.
Episodes.
Ecco, on Dante in Trentino, and of course the monument was part of them. Yes, this was basically. Yeah.
Questions? Oi, you need to. Unfortunately, you need to stand up and do the walk of shame, because this microphone needs to hear you. Yeah.
This is a question from complete ignorance, because I've never been to that part of Italy, but it looks stunning. And all I really know about that part of Italy is that Yannick Sinner won the Australian Open yesterday, the tennis player.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the extent of my knowledge about that area.
We are so happy.
So I'm sure you are. Yes.
Yeah.
He's a great player. I'm delighted. Yeah, it's great for tennis, great for him. But you said that statue is really important for it was important for Italian nationalists, and they would go and have a photograph taken in front of it. Does that still happen?
No,
No.
no. I have to say, I tried to ask a few people
Thanks, Maureen.
what actually they know about this monument, what it is, when it was done, and who was the government, and so. And my fellow citizens, especially the youngest or my generation, more or less, don't know anything about it. But this happens, I think, for most monuments around Europe. So monuments just recently became a topic once again and became interesting because of the, cancel culture or proposal of moving them around and so on. But otherwise, for decades, monuments have been ignored, especially the monuments from the 19th century and the Risorgimento. We know nothing about our history, basically. Also because it's quite complicated, full of names, peoples, and revolutions, aborted revolutions, and so on. We know who Garibaldi is. Nothing more. So this story is quite unknown, and no, but, still a few years ago. For instance, the generation of my parents used to take family picture in front of it. Yes. Because the family picture has to be done once, and it has to be nice, and the monument was a good place to do that. It's actually, anyway, it's unanimously considered an irredentist monument. They know that. But actually, I tried to argue that this is not as straightforward. So that's the point. Thank you.
And I mean, this is very much an unfair question, but I'm just thinking really about more specifically Dante in Italy as opposed to statues or stained glass windows of Dante outside of Italy, or the function of Dante outside of Italy. But how do you think Dante will change by the next centenary? Because what he
Which
has
centenary?
well, so let's say 20.
One.
Yeah, 21 or
21.
okay, yeah. So what kind of function can he have then, or if you could put yourself forward in that, because he's been utilized in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And obviously the 19th century and coming into 1921, there's a very different kind of focus for what Dante is, and it's about nation building, it's unifying a nation, it's very patriotic, nationalistic, both its good and bad elements and things like that. Nowadays, it's kind of harder to understand what the Dante function is, but it is also a way of celebrating culture, a particular type of culture. There's a kind of global Dante, but what happens after? That's one for everyone, by the way. It's not just
of
it's not just for
and of course I don't know, but no, I think that anyway the global Dante, it's not just one of the possible aspects of this is a really new Dante. I think that the global Dante is the most crucial nowadays, also because it's not the Dante of the Italians. The Dante of the Italians is still something very, very different. If you have a look at the commercial books published in Italy for the centenary, like, Aldo Cazzullo sent, Aldo Cazzullo is a journalist, a prominent journalist of the Corriere della Sera, who actually is a very good, effective divulgatore.
Spreader,
also TV presenter, about history, any kind of history. Also, they recently wrote a book on the Romans, and then one on Caporetto, and I don't know. So his 3 books on Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, who actually are readings of the 3 canticles, wavered with some kind of all kinds of historical references and episodes. sent more than all Dante scholars in all centuries altogether.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. It was really a bestseller, but it's very much an Italian Dante. Still Dante representing Italy and its genius, its cultural preeminence, or supposed preeminence. Whilst around the world you see a completely different Dante. So for us, the contrast, I think, that is particularly striking. So one could wonder how on earth a minister of the Republic should judge if Dante was a right or leftist or whatsoever. But to me, this is not surprising because this is still an issue.
Yeah.
So the Dante father of Italy is still an issue. So I don't know if this is gonna fading away very easily, at least in Italy. Because actually nations and nationalism and discourse on nations are prominent, more prominent than ever, even in a European context. And so this is a very strong symbol.
In fact, it becomes more of a national question the more integrated Europe becomes.
Yes, of course.
Oddly enough, yeah. I realize I'm hogging on. Elsina, come up here, please.
But to go back to the statue, I just was wondering, like, I was just wondering, yeah, if you could comment a bit on like the proportions, because I noticed like the representation of Inferno looks like much bigger, and also like looks like a bit of an athlete, like the yeah, you showed some of the models, but if there is kind of a reason for these proportions and also this specific representation of Lucifer.
Okay, thank you for your question. So the proportions, I think that first of all depend once again from on an artistic reason. So he needed to be consistent with his degrading towards the top. But the choice for hell is actually not just the choice for hell, but as you rightly said, the choice of really highlighting purgatory that much, which is not really not a topic elsewhere. It's striking. So first of all, the purgatory allowed to highlight discourse on language. That's true. That's undeniable. So probably that's the first. I mean, the sparkle to all the other decisions. Moreover, the purgatory allows to encapsulate different kinds of people and of allegories. This is very much an allegorical monument. So, whilst minus for justice and for hell is an interesting choice because it's unique. Of course, this is also a Michelangelo, like statue. It's very muscular and very, because of that. So, what does it represent? Not just hell, but probably justice, because Minos is the one who judges the souls. So it's a kind of warning to those who pass by. So the first figure you see is Minos. It really struck me when I was a child. I tended to imitate him. And so you have to take it as a kind of warning, ethic warning, but also a warning to take care of the national cause, of course. But Ranzi, at some point during the war, so this leader of all the enterprise, was arrested and also tried for the monument. Actually, his writings about the monument were the proof for the trial. So he was asked, is it true that Minos signifies justice and that and signifies the oceans? No, it's not possible because Austrians are not administrating justice. So the two things cannot go together. But it was the war, and he had to not just to defend himself. He didn't even try to defend himself. He was, of course, counteracting once again. But these are the true things. Justice as a value, once again. Like fraternity, justice is something that we all have to share, both the citizens, but also the governors. And justice is what allows the nations to live together. So this is more complex than just, okay, is hell. No, it's not just hell. And thank you for your question, because you gave me the opportunity to go deep into this.
We have a question online from Federica, who's written it out. I wonder if you have any evidence of the involvement of local schools and istituti superiori in the celebration of the monument, and to what extent the creation of the monument informed the local teaching of the text.
Nowadays, I think it's the... yes, I've got one example from, once again, from my family, because when he was 13, so in the Scuola Media, my nephew actually was involved into a project about the monument. So he was told so he already knew some of the story, and they had to create a kind of online exhibition or a PowerPoint, something very simple. But he had a very, very good teacher. So I don't know if this kind of activities is really very, very much widespread. Of course, it is a good tool to some extent to give some, at least some insights on purgatory, for sure.
And it is, I mean, it's very obvious that, by choosing that episode, when people think of Sordello, they think of I Serve Italia. It comes out there.
Yes.
So I'm wondering then, and this will be the last, I won't get to it any more questions because I know I'm abusing your time, but I'm wondering then, so you talked about the Paradiso, there's a couple of angels there, there's Beatrice looking down at Dante. Is that an allegory of that, what Italy may become in the future, a dream? Italy as a paradise?
Yes, of course. At some point, someone said, okay, but the Trentini are in this kind of purgatory, a seemingly endless purgatory, but they are aspiring to heaven, which is Italy. So, yes, at some point, yes, especially the figure on the rare side, who is going, flying.
Yes. Okay. Fantastic.
Flying away. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have puttered through her paces enough, and we should let her off the hook at this point. But before we go this evening, I just want to remind everybody, those of you online and those of you here in the room, that due to the intricacies and the new national bank holiday we have in Ireland, next Monday is a bank holiday, so therefore there will be no lecture next week, and we will riprendere, we will take it up again in 2 weeks' time, where we have Matthew Treherne, who is going to be talking to us about Dante and the future of finance. So that should be an interesting one. And all of you people who have been with us over the years will remember Matthew, who's been over here on a number of occasions. He's a great supporter of the centre and a wonderful scholar as well. So we look forward to that. So you all have a break next week. Enjoy a break, but Dante resumes in 2 weeks' time. But before we go this evening, will you just please join me in thanking Anna for a most spectacular lecture. Right, I'm going to stop the recording.